Okay, that's moot. Okay.
All right, good evening. I'm going to call this February 16th, 2023 Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to have our main topic be a discussion about the Urban Forest Management Plan, so let's get started. First, I'll do roll call. Just please say here or present when I call your name. Carrie Bosworth.
Present.
Thanks. Mike Bresco.
Present.
John Bachman.
Here.
Mark Boffman. I'm here. Wasim Fayed.
Here.
And we also have our new planning commissioner joining us this evening, Syed Safavian, and I'll get that more smoothly pronounced later. Syed, can you take just 30 seconds and introduce yourself?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be in here and joining the commission. My name is Syed Safavian. I'm a resident of the city for the last 21 years. I wasn't here before there was a city. Professionally, my background is I have two different backgrounds, planning and engineering. I've worked for the government. I have served the city of Issaquah for a number of years as a planning commission. I worked for the DOT, WashDOT, and I worked for the city of Bothell for 13 years as their transportation engineer manager. Right now, I'm kind of working part-time on a consultant side.
Sounds like you'll be a good translator for all the technical stuff Evan throws at us. All right, Julian, let's go ahead and read the meeting accessibility statement.
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with the latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comment through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://us06 web.j/j/828-226-48794. To give public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number: US +1 253 215 8782, webinar ID 828-226-48794#.
Thank you. Next, let's have approval of this evening's agenda. Any comments or changes to this evening's agenda? You don't see any, so we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. Next is approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was February 2nd. Anybody have any corrections to the meeting minutes?
I do. So for the vice chair, had my name as John Michael, so we need to scratch the John. So it was a small typo.
Great. I'll stop calling you John, I guess. Anything else? Okay, we'll call the meeting minutes approved with that one correction. Thanks, Mike. Okay, next is public comment for non-agenda items. Again, the agenda topic this evening is an update on the Urban Forest Management Plan program. So for other public comment, now's the time. Julian, do we have anybody making public comment for non-agenda?
I actually have no hands raised.
Wow.
And disregard, I have one hand raised from Mr. Stickney. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Almost.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I thought I had my hand up, but I didn't. I'm glad Julian said something, because I did intend just a couple things to talk about. Welcome to new Commissioner Syed, and I don't know your last name by heart yet, so I'll figure out how to say that. And congratulations. And at your next meeting, you'll have your 7th appointed, planning commissioner added also. Odds are some of you watched the city council meeting last Tuesday. I think it's a good meeting. I'm not going to recap the specifics, but there was quite a lot of discussion about greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. Lots of discussion about the scope of work for the climate action plan with a fairly significant increase to the scope for the comprehensive plan. Lots of discussion about the community vision and the comp plan scope of work. So all in all, it's a good meeting to watch. If you haven't had the opportunity to see it, I'd recommend taking a look at that. One meeting coming up that's not too much on the radar is next Wednesday, 6 days from now. There is it's on the Civic Web, but it's a SMAP meeting. It's the Stormwater Management Action Plan. And the council is considering adopting this plan, which is new for the city of Sammamish. It's part of the stormwater standards. They're contemplating adopting it at a meeting in March. Now, they may change their minds, but there is going to be public input on this. So if you want to take a look at what's in that plan, I'm curious what that is. I haven't had a chance to see it. It's allegedly going to be posted tomorrow, but if it isn't, it would probably be up on Monday. But next Wednesday, between 7 and 8, there's a webinar online if you have interest in the Stormwater Management Action Plan. And lastly, at the City Council meeting coming up on Tuesday, I noticed something that haven't seen often, so I'll just call out that it's a little bit not typical. The first hour from roughly 5:30 to 6:20, the council's going to be meeting in the executive boardroom, but it is open to the public, and they're going to be discussing city manager goals, and then the regular meeting starts at 6:40. And the first part's not going to be taped. So if anybody has any interest, that's going to be there on Tuesday. All right, appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. And we have no more hands raised.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thank you, Julian. Let's move on to our main topic for this evening, which is Urban Forest Management Plan Program Update. And Kelly, I think you're going to introduce it.
I am. Well, good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Kelly Hildy. I am the Deputy Director of Community Development. Joining me tonight is Evan Fisher, who will be leading the presentation on the Urban Forest Management Program, giving an update and providing a glance into the future. So with that, I will hand it over to Evan.
Great. Thank you, Kelly, and good evening, Planning Commission. As Kelly said, my name is Evan Fisher, and I'm a Senior Management Analyst with the Department of Community Development, and tonight I'm excited to provide you an update on the Urban Forest Management Program. During tonight's presentation, we'll spend a little time refreshing ourselves on the program's history and background before we look at the 21-22 progress report. After that, we'll briefly touch on where the program is going in the coming years. To begin, I'd first like to look back at the city's Urban Forest Management Plan. The city began developing its first Urban Forest Management Plan in 2017, which was adopted by the City Council in 2019. The UFMP is a policy guide for managing, enhancing, and growing trees in the city over the next 20 years. It sets a series of goals and objectives around urban forest sustainability, efficiency in municipal operations, and community collaboration and engagement. The planning process for developing the UFMP was broken up into two distinct phases. The first phase, as you can see here, was to establish goals and objectives. This was done through extensive community engagement, research and analysis, and understanding the city's existing urban forest resource. The second phase began after the adoption of the UFMP and was aimed at developing an implementation strategy. This brings us to the Strategic Implementation Plan, or SIP. The SIP is how we make the goals and objectives of the UFMP actionable. Staff created a matrix of 159 individual implementation actions that was developed by collecting suggested actions by the Planning Commission, City Council, and public during the development of the UFMP and through the annual docket process. Additionally, the city's consultant conducted extensive interviews with city staff and recommended a list of actions to be included. The list of implementation actions can be found on the city's website. On screen, you can see a snip of the matrix. On the left, you'll see which UFMP goals and objectives are being referenced. You'll then see the implementation action and a list of criteria for each action, including which work group it has been placed on, how long it's estimated to take to complete the action, and which department was originally assigned the work. Staff, with the help of the Planning Commission and City Council, then sorted each of the implementation actions by determining if the actions would help establish the program, build the program, strengthen it, or optimize it. These groupings were turned into staff work plans. On screen, you can see the types of actions that were placed into each work group. In Work Group 1, which was the 21-22 work plan, tasks included items like inventory and analysis, updating city contracts and specifications, and updating the tree web pages. Now that we've gone over background, I'll shift gears into providing a report on the great work we've been able to do in 21-22. We're very proud of this work, especially considering we were balancing a very limited staff capacity and relying heavily on consultant support. That said, we believe we've effectively laid the groundwork for establishing a successful urban forest management program. The biggest item of work we took on in 21-22 was creating a street and park tree inventory. We worked with Davie Resource Group to collect data on just under 20,000 publicly owned trees. The inventory was focused on trees with publicly owned right-of-ways and within parks and, city parks and facilities. On screen, you can see an overview of the inventory data as points on the map. Each point represents a tree that Davie physically inspected and collected data for. The data was logged using an inventory management software called TreeKeeper, for which the city has purchased a 5-year license. A link to the TreeKeeper database and map will be made available on the city's website later this spring. For each tree, Davie collected the data points you can see on screen. All of this data has been captured in TreeKeeper and can be easily accessed by clicking on a dot on the map. This data will help the city manage its urban forest resource by understanding which trees require maintenance or inspection, what the general condition of our resource is in, or if we have adequate species diversity. The goal is for city staff to be trained in continually updating the inventory to maintain as current and accurate of a database as possible. To synthesize the inventory data, Davie has produced a draft inventory tree report. The report provides analysis of the data by identifying species diversity, canopy cover, and tree conditions. It also analyzes the benefit in environmental impacts, air quality, stormwater runoff reductions, and more. Lastly, it spells out maintenance and care needs to help the city manage the resource. This report will be finalized in the coming months and published on the city's website. I would also just like to take a moment to note that this work was funded in part through a grant from the Washington Department of Natural Resources. The city has simplified its tree permitting process by consolidating the different tree permit types into one easier-to-use permit. The city has also started collecting additional data from the point of permit application to help identify potential issues of tree health, including pest and disease. In the coming months, the data will be integrated into the city's GIS mapping system so we can easily identify trends or areas that may be impacted by tree health issues. The city has also been updating its tree web pages to centralize tree-related content. We've created a resource and learning library that includes guidance tools and resources. We will be continuing to make updates on the improvements on our tree pages on the city's new website once it's launched later this spring. The city has developed street tree removal guidance to tackle the growing number of reports about trees being removed from public rights-of-way without proper permits, as well as the rising uncertainty about who is accountable for maintaining or removing street trees, notably in neighborhoods with homeowners associations. It's important to note that not all street trees are the responsibility of the city. Therefore, to offer more transparency and avoid unpermitted removals, staff created informational guides and updated permit forms. This guidance is essential for ensuring compliance with tree and right-of-way development standards, promoting consistency, and providing transparency for residents. The public will soon be able to use the interactive tree inventory map found in TreeKeeper to identify trees either maintained by the city or an HOA. The city tasked Davie Resource Group with creating a quick reference guide for language to be included in its contracts or specification documents around tree care practices and standards. The document includes the most up-to-date arborist certified language in 10 sections, including topics like pruning, root management, and management of trees and shrubs during site development and construction. This will help create uniform tree care practices within city operations. While the Department of Community Development took the lead on managing the 21-22 Urban Forest Management Work Plan, we worked closely with our counterparts in Public Works and Parks and Recreation to establish the program. Both departments served as stakeholders in project work and helped in work planning. As we move into 23-24, the program management structure will be shifted to the city manager's office, but each department will continue to collaborate on urban forest work. Staff was asked to conduct research to better understand what a tree board in Sammamish may look like and how it may function. We looked at other cities' tree boards and compiled a memo that will be given to the city manager's office as they take over the program management in 23-24. The guidance should help assist in setting a forthcoming sustainability board, which will provide direction and guidance on urban forest management. I've mentioned the changes coming in 23-24, and now I want to spend just a moment going over what's coming for the program. During the 23-24 budget process, the City Council created a position of a sustainability coordinator within the city manager's office. This position will lead many of the city's efforts around preserving our environment, including managing our urban forest. This position will be supported by a future sustainability board or commission that will provide direction and advise the city council. Budget has been allocated for this work in 23 and 24, and we're excited to help transition the program when that person is brought on board. And before I wrap it up and open it up for questions, I'd like to acknowledge that while we're really proud of all we were able to accomplish in 2021 and 22, there's still more work to be done in establishing the program. We are excited, however, that the city will be getting a staff person who is dedicated to moving this program forward, and we're eager to support that person in the coming years. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Chair Boffman.
Thanks, Evan and Kelly. Who has questions? Go ahead. Oh, John, do you as well?
Go ahead. Excuse me, I have a number of questions. At this point, I don't know, it's too early to ask these questions. For instance, I didn't hear anything about the tree adoption program policies and procedures.
Sorry, having microphone muting issues there. Kelly, I'm not sure if you have anything specific on tree adoption policies.
Yeah, definitely. We do have an update on that. We will be looking at incorporating in the comprehensive plan update an overall canopy goal for our urban forest. That was something that was identified in the implementation strategies to happen at the time that we start working on the comp plan, which is now. So that will be happening this year. Of course, we will be looking at other policies as we are working on that environmental and conservation element of the comprehensive plan. So yes, that work will be happening this year.
Second question, is there any possible funding available from federal government under the new guidelines that come from the administration as far as assisting in local jurisdictions that the city can take advantage of as far as a tree plantation or maintenance and all that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not personally aware of any specific federal funding that you might be referring to. However, the city does actively look and participate in grant programs like the one we got from the Washington Department of Natural Resources. Kelly, do you have any further information on potential federal funding?
I don't have any information on federal funding, but we do track funding from King County and, as Evan mentioned, the Department of Natural Resources for Washington State. We've been successful with both of those in the past. So
one example would be the guidelines that are passed by the Senate last year, the infrastructure funding. I know it's kind of a stretch as far as this. There is no direct relationship between a tree planting and a tree maintenance and all that. But there may be some funding that the city can look into it as far as getting some money from federal government to do some of these works.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea and something I think we could note for that future said sustainability coordinator who will have the bandwidth, and it'll be kind of under their purview to go and seek out dollars to support the program and manage those monies. So it's a worthwhile idea to look into.
For the purpose of this exercise, what is the definition of the tree? How old a tree should be a tree?
That's
is
a
that
good
1
question.
year, 6 years, 6 months, 2 days?
That's a good question, Kelly. I think our code does some defining of tree by diameter breast height, but I'm not sure. I'm not particularly familiar with when it would tip from maybe shrub to tree. Kelly, do you have any information on that?
I don't. I will say we do. Our regulations define what a significant tree is for a deciduous and an evergreen tree. I hope there won't be a follow-up question on what those diameters are, because I'll have to look that up for you, but I can do that easily. But that transition between a shrub and a tree, we don't define that. We do just define significant trees.
Thank you.
Yep. As well as landmark and heritage trees as well. So those also have special classifications depending on the age and are dependent on the diameter at breast height.
Say it.
I may have some questions, but I want to give a chance to the other people to.
John, would you go next, since we're just going to go down the line here?
Had to find my button. So, big question was answered when you talked about the program will ultimately be in the city manager's office, which is, I think, is incredibly encouraging, considering the breadth that, it touches public works, parks, IT, everyone. And urban forestry often takes a back seat when it comes to budget. The fire chief comes in and takes their swipe at these hands save babies. It's hard to fight that on the urban forestry front. Reminder that it's just not operating budget, but also capital budget. So that's sort of my poke at the council to keep that in mind when CIP comes around. There was a lot of content in that outline, and I have almost 20 years in the resource management side of parks, so I have a lot of sort of background in the whole urban forestry management and then budgeting piece. Some specific things. Volunteers. There was a lot of mention of volunteers in the plan, and so far I've only seen one body identified to staff the program. Volunteers are not free, and a robust volunteer program requires a lot of coordination and, frankly, staff So however that gets covered, that's a resource issue, particularly if you want to take advantage of those thousands and thousands of potential hours. Because urban forestry is one of the things that you can really integrate in with community groups, and the schools really like to have vertical programs that start at the earliest ages and go all the way through high school. So great opportunities there. Of course, urban forestry also comes up with a huge number of potential rub points or conflict areas, tree canopy versus just basic development, management of existing public and private, particularly private. My experience is based on a couple years ago, but the tree permitting process can be slow and cumbersome. It's encouraging to see that you've put some thought and time into updating that. Wildfire management is also going to be a really tough subject where we've got very dense, close-in urban forest areas. I know in my house with trees growing over the house. And I didn't see too much, or I missed it, on just general forest management practices. That is, the ability, at least when I was doing my permits, it was codified. You take down a significant tree, you had to replace it with 2 or 3. But in forest management program, you might be thinning dog hair and you don't want to replace. You're opening up the canopy so that the existing trees can grow more, removing understory for fire. So those elements, if they're not worked into the current code, need to. I mean, I have trees on my property that desperately need to be thinned. But under the current code, it'd be very difficult because I don't have any place to put new trees that would actually grow. They'd all be shaded out. Tree board. A bit of concern with a tree board inserting itself into technical and professional questions. Policy, fine, but taking a homeowner's permit issue to a tree board, rather see it stay with staff. Then finally, a couple things. The big one is an open space forest management bond issue. The best way to preserve open space in our city is simply to buy it. And open space bonds are usually very popular with community because it's not a soccer field in their backyard. And then, of course, you'd want an accompanying levy lift for maintenance and operation. Lastly, a couple operational issues. City's highest response should be hazard tree requests. I've heard of up to 6 weeks to take down a hazard tree. In fact, the hazard tree fell on the power lines before the permit could get issued. So I would particularly like to see that sped up. And then you've also already been working on a lot of the best management practices, documenting it so that better, higher standard processes like thinning, where appropriate, can be done. And then, of course, the wildfire management. Those would be high priorities for me. So I think that's all I have.
And if I may, you brought up some really good points that I wanted to provide some additional updates on. You're absolutely right about our development regulations, and the timing couldn't be better. We will be looking at updating our development regulations in 25 once the comprehensive plan has been adopted and those new policy guidance adopted with that. just for a point of background, we developed our tree regulations prior to the development of the urban forest management plan and the implementation strategies. And we've learned a lot through that planning exercise. But we also have so many changes, as you all are very familiar with, that is going to impact the update of our comprehensive plan in regards to land use changes. And so looking and reviewing our development regulations is going to be key. Additionally, wildfire management, that is very much a popular topic right now. Myself and Evan did serve on a interjurisdictional work group last year with King County leading a wildfire management strategy plan, which was adopted, I want to say last fall. I know our emergency management department is working with Eastside Fire and Rescue. Will be looking at a more specific, Sammamish-specific wildfire management program. And so that is also on the horizon. And I could not agree with you more about roles and responsibilities of a tree board. When it does come to technical review, we do like to leave that to our staff to complete that review. So I do really appreciate the feedback and the comments. And again, I just wanted to highlight some other updates regarding the development regulations update as well as wildfire management. So.
Okay, let's go to Carrie.
Thank you. Let me just lower my hand here real quick. I'm not sure. So I know we have a lot of great work done in our community by our stewards. I would imagine they would be part of the volunteer effort for this. One of them once mentioned, I don't know, I'd like to ask if it's in our code or not, whether they have the opportunity to go and collect species, for her areas where we may be developing. Is there an opportunity for them to take, go in and maybe there's little trees that could be replanted elsewhere? Is that something that we do or need to more firmly establish?
No, we do that. And I will have to follow up with what that process is, but we do communicate with the native plant stewards when development is occurring prior to site construction, an opportunity to be able to go in and remove species and replant them. So that is an administrative process that's handled through the permitting process, and that's coordinated here with our staff. I would be more than happy to follow up. I know we've currently been looking at that and working with our community members on that program, so I can bring more information back to the commission or follow up with an email with that program.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Carrie, was that it?
Yes.
Okay. Wasim?
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions. I understand there was a lot of work done in terms of inventorying all the trees in the parks and the right-of-ways. What happens when a windstorm hits and many of those trees, go down? How do we keep inventorying those? Do we replace them? What happens in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ideally the goal is that our maintenance staff who will go out and respond and clear those trees would then look to see if that tree's been inventoried, and if it had been, make a note on that or remove that tree from the inventory, opening that space back up. And there's ways you can mark that as like a vacant site to then be replanted. So it's a really versatile tool, and the goal is to get our maintenance and streets crew up to speed on how to use it and integrate that into their workflow so it's an asset.
But how do you get alerted that a tree fell down if it's deep in the forest? How do you inventory those on a regular basis, or how does this work?
That's also a good question. Most of the street trees are along right of way, so we would probably find out pretty quickly if a tree had been down. But some of the trees in our parks property, we'd have to rely on reports from park users or park staff to go in. And it could be the case that a tree comes down and we don't, deep in a park, and we don't notice it for a couple months. But once we do, we can go and update the inventory. once we've found that.
Thank you.
Mike?
Well, it's tough acts to follow with so much expertise here and so many great questions. So I'll just add that having been on the commission when the forest management plan was reviewed and the discussions that we had at the time, it was impressive how much was put together, all of the strategies. It was also a little bit overwhelming how many. And I can recall some of the discussion about the early on stages in terms of like building the base and the things that have happened. And just kudos to you all for getting so much done already. The learning library, the inventory that was done, having practices, uniform practices in place. It's really a great start. So it's been interesting for me to see sort of the early genesis of the plan and how it's starting to fall into place and how there's a home for it now with the city manager's office. So it's a really good progress. And I really would have struggled to have as many good comments and insights as the rest of the commissioners. So I want to thank you all for that too. So that's all I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you.
I had a couple of more specific questions. Let's see what would be the right order here. So one thing, when we went through the process of creating the urban forest management plan, that got a lot of attention and discussion was the idea of creating a staff position with the city as an urban forester. And there was a lot of back and forth about the cost versus the benefit and everything like that. And I guess I'm curious, is that still something that's being considered, or with this new sustainability board, and I think you said sustainability director, I'm not sure if I have that title right, but is that kind of in lieu of an urban forester, or is there still some discussion about that? And mainly I asked that because it was a big topic at the time.
Sure. I think I'll best defer to Kelly because I think she tracked that process a little more closely than I did with the city council.
Yeah. I also drafted the proposal to City Council for that position, as well as the position for an arborist. Unfortunately, with the review of the 23-24 work budget, City Council decided not to move forward with those two positions, and instead move forward with the sustainability coordinator position. That would be 50% sustainability focused and 50% urban forestry focus. And moving under the city manager's office will be a great opportunity to recalibrate. And I think when they get the work program or all the implementation strategies we so wonderfully drafted and they approved, I think deciding how that's going to be incorporated into the work program and how we can best utilize our resources. I see that position didn't go away forever. It just may come back in the next two-year budget cycle. There were a lot of positions considered during this last budget conversation. And I know there were just some really hard decisions that had to be made. We are really happy that we got at least someone dedicated to urban forestry. And to be able to focus on that along with sustainability, I think that is a marriage made in heaven. There's a lot of crossover. It is still a lot of work, and I don't want to underestimate it, but at least we have a start. And I am just optimistic that the program will continue to grow and the resources and the staffing will grow along with it.
So for whatever it may be worth from my standpoint, I'm not necessarily an advocate for just growing staff to grow staff, but I do think that the arborist was the word I really probably should have used, but the arborist skill set is a kind of a narrow and specific thing that it's hard to just substitute somebody in on. So I hope that the conversation continues to keep those skills somewhere available, whether that's consultant or a full-time person or part of another person who has the right education. I hope that maintains, that becomes an item that the discussion, kind of keeps after. Next one is that database. It sounds kind of impressive to me, actually. 20,000 data points. I'm curious how they did that, but not for this discussion. But I'm wondering, has there been any conversation about how that's going to be used? It just seems like you create a huge amount of data And when you have a lot of data, usually somebody is pretty clever about thinking of ways to use it, whether that's, I mean, I'm just sitting here off the top of my head thinking about distribution across the city, or species analysis, or tracking, what's growing well and what's not from if we're experiencing some climate change and dry weather. How is that database going to be used? It seems like a really treasure trove of information.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the examples you listed are hope for how it could be used in the future. The tree inventory report that I mentioned it's in draft form, but we hope to have that finalized and published in the next month or so. Really lays out a thorough analysis of our species diversity, the condition of our urban forest, and taking things like that suggestion of maybe we look at our species diversity and find that we have some pretty climate change unresilient isn't a word, but unresilient trees in our population, and maybe when we're thinking of replanting, we should be picking a more resilient species. Maintenance, it lists our maintenance needs, including our urgent maintenance needs. So the hope is that our maintenance crews can help prioritize their work plans by using the inventory. I think that also can identify areas of potential planting opportunities. One thing we hear often is that it's hard to find more space on, a homeowner's private property to replant trees, but maybe there's potential in the right-of-ways where we could spend those credits of replanting in areas where it would have public benefit. So there's, I think, a lot of potential opportunities how we could use that data, and we've yet to kind of identify our prime modes, but there's a lot of opportunity there.
Might be a good question to make sure to cover with Davie Resource Group too. Next question is, I'm curious if, we originally had that plan, if I get this right, it was build, develop, sustain, I forget the exact groups on that. Have you done kind of a comparison, sort of a thermometer that says how much of the initial phase we accomplished or didn't accomplish, or just kind of a sense of how we've done compared to what our objectives were?
I don't think we've done maybe a formal assessment of like a firm percentage, but I would say what feels right to me is on our established work plan phase, maybe we did 50 to 75%. And I think given our staffing resources this year, that feels like a pretty strong performance, and we're eager to, be able to hand it to the city manager's office and say, hey, here's what we did, and here's how we can help you finish that last 25 to 50% of establish, and then set priorities for the next phase, which I think was build.
Yeah, those words were meant to be easy to remember, and still I
yeah.
don't remember them. Yeah, I think that it was a pretty robust plan, so it feels right that we should do a little bit of measuring to see how we're doing, because it was so robust.
It's a good idea.
My last question is more of just for all of us, now with this transitioning into the city manager's office and in some ways getting spread out into the different departments, what further interaction will the Planning Commission have with the Urban Forest Management Plan in the next, couple of years? That's
a good question. I think TBD. I say that in part because I don't know exactly how the city manager's office and that sustainability coordinator will be prioritizing their work items. Also, your calendar will be very full for the next 2 years with the comp plan and climate action plan and other items. But I could see potentially, and Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but that position coming to help do some work planning with the Planning Commission once they're up and running. But Kelly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just a friendly reminder, anything that updates development regulations, our policy, all of that work always comes to the Planning Commission, and that includes urban forestry work as well. So I think there will be a lot of collaboration and coordination, and we're looking forward to seeing how that rolls out.
Okay, thanks. Let's go back to Syed down there.
Follow-up question on your inventory. Have you thought about creating some tags for each tree so you have all the information? Do you have that
Yeah,
as a
so
part of the system?
yeah, so the inventory, the map, if you go on the map, it's just 20,000 individual dots for each individual tree. So right now you could go in and zoom in on a particular tree, and when you click on it, it'll pull up the Google Street View of the tree, and then that data set, listing its species, diameter, condition, if there's wires present, its main defect. So you can really hone in on specific trees. And then one thing that we'll be doing, we hope to do is group them into different layers in GIS. And so some of the street trees that we inventoried are in our city maintained zones. For lack of a better term, I'll just call them maintenance zones. But I think there were 16 or 19 maintenance zones that our public works crew goes out and maintains. And so we can delineate those using GIS layers. And there might be other appropriate ways to group trees.
So,
I'd like to, if I can just add really quick to what Evan was saying too, as our maintenance group, Parks and Public Works Maintenance Group integrates this into their workflow, also be able to see maintenance notes on those specific trees. So it's just such a great tool of reporting, not only what is existing with the tree, but also how it's being maintained. I also wanted to know, and just follow up with your comments earlier, Chair Boffman, is that this just having this data resource is also just a way for us to work, plan, and budget. This resource is just going to be so critical, and we've actually are using it, or will be probably using it with code compliance. It just is. It seems to be just this inventory is just going to help with so many things that we are challenged with when it comes to maintaining our resources, our tree resources in the right of way and in our public spaces. And so I just wanted to add that note, as well as add on to what Evan was saying about the information that will be provided on each one of those trees, and they're tagged. I'm not the professional how that is tagged, but it's tagged with GIS data points. Is that correct, Evan?
Yeah. Yep.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I believe so. And currently there are 2 layer sets, so you can toggle between the street trees and park trees and separate those out.
what do we know about the other jurisdictions' programs similar to this? Kirkland, Redmond, Bellevue. Do they have such programs?
That's a good question. Kelly, do you know if our neighboring cities also have tree inventories?
I'm really familiar with Renton, is the city I'm familiar with the most. I'd have to look into those other cities. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I actually attended the Salmon Festival, and I had a long discussion with the gentleman that he was actually employed by the city of Issaquah dealing with the forestry, and he was very knowledgeable, and he was very busy answering questions from the public. Some policy and maybe action items that you may have already considered. Policy is about encouraging homeowners to plant trees. Is this something that is going to be a part of the plan? And if you do, are there some incentives that the city can provide to encourage people to plant more trees? This is not a question and answer. I'm making some comments, so
sure.
You may want to consider public education by providing seminars, tours, one-on-one, attending some of the social gatherings, some of these events maybe, working with the school districts, and maybe arranging some things that maybe the school district would allow whoever is going to be heading this program to go and educate the children and get them to know the issues and all that. That would be very useful. From early age, they should know about the importance of the trees. How about, I didn't hear that much about drought-tolerant plant. Is that something that city should be looking at and encouraging? Native plants rather than plants that they're not necessarily good for our climate. That's it. Thank you.
Right down the line, John, you're next.
Kelly, question, comment for you. Chairman Boffman asked about the arborist, but we already use quite a few arborist resources, particularly through parks and public works when there's a project. I know Pine Lake, they just did a huge thinning project that would have involved an arborist selecting those trees. So I guess just asking you to confirm that we're not totally without arborist action, either in private development or public.
You're correct. We utilize consultants, and we have, as far as I know, 3 consultant contracts with arborists, and including one in DCD that reviews development applications as well as supports code compliance when illegal tree removal has been reported. Parks has their own arborist, as well as Public Works. Public Works arborist supports the maintenance division. So if there are any issues with trees that need in the right of way that need to be assessed, removed, or just maintained, we do utilize those services through contracts with consultant companies and firms.
I'll go back to you, Carrie. Did you have any more follow-up questions? Nope. Okay. Wasim, do you have anything more?
Yeah, I will basically, I want to give you a little background here. I come from Lebanon, and I lived in a big city in Beirut where we hardly see a tree. I love the city of Sammamish because of the forestry and the trees that's in it, and then the great environment that we see and the air that we breathe. So it is really mind-boggling to me to see how we care so much about trees. I was never raised to understand the importance of trees, to see all this work and that we actually are doing something about it, and not just, it's just trees because God created them, but we're actually doing work for this is really beautiful. And I really kudos to all of you for all this great work, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, nothing else? I don't have anything else. I'll just say kind of last shot here. Anybody have any final comments or questions? Nope. Okay. Great work, Kelly. Evan, thank you for the update.
Yeah, thank you much, and thank you for the great comments.
We'll look forward to seeing what happens out of the city manager's office. Okay, let's move on to our agenda-related public comment period for this evening. So this is public comment related to the topic we just discussed. And do we have anybody in the room who wants to make comments? Mr. Eastman.
So to clarify, I'm the only one in the room. I purposely sit outside of the camera because I don't like being in a YouTube video. You guys don't have that same luxury. But yeah, I want to shamelessly put a little plug in for myself. As discussed before, I have 100 acres of property, and you can go on my website and check it out. But I think I have, I don't know, maybe 80 acres of forest. And one of my things I want to do is put a bunch of suspension bridges through the forest canopy and bring people to see how wonderful the trees are, and also feel like a little kid again, being among them. So as we talked about some of those, a place to plant trees, how we manage trees, the fire concerns, and then also the global warming. I know certain species I see dead more than others. Most recently, I think the red cedar. I don't know if it's drought. I don't know what it is, but as you go under the Mercer Island into the tunnel and you look above you, there's probably 5 or 6 dead cedars. I think they finally took them out. On the way to the airport, you see a bunch there. So I think as far as using your databases, you could really start to see, the life expectancy of trees and when to expect them to finally die, or if they're dying prematurely, and just kind of use all that data and information and maybe also disseminate that to the public. But as far as my own stuff goes, I'm hopeful the city will partner with me and take me up on the opportunity to include it in the scope update for the 2044 vision, the comp plan update. But I mean, there could be really some unique opportunities to create management programs of forests here locally on private property, and implement all the things you're discussing as part of a partnership. And that's all. Thank you.
Just to clarify, we got to maintain the rules here that the room is full of people excited about the Planning Commission. So no comments about the only person here. Okay, who else do we have, Julian?
We have 2 hands up. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hi, good evening. This is Mary Wichter, Sammamish for 22 years. I'm really glad to see the report for the Urban Forestry Management Plan. It was bumped around on this schedule a lot. So thank you for all the work being done and showing the tree inventory map and talking about how to use it, and really excellent inputs from the Planning Commission. I just wanted to talk about a few things. Commissioner Carrie Bosworth had asked about how do you go in and save trees? That's called plant salvage. There's an idea to do that, but I really do hope that Kelly will follow up on that. That plant stewards really want to do it. There is a checkbox for it, but it's not getting done or informed. And I literally think anytime a person does a project guidance request, like, hey, I've got some blackberry stuff and I want to remove them, or I'm doing something, I think even just for the feasibility response, if they could know that plant salvage, they could learn about it. They could salvage their own plants. They could be educated, and that's just not happening. That's more needs to happen with plant salvage, and it can be wider implemented than even potentially what it could be now. I did want to talk about, I didn't read the stuff online about the education for trees, but one thing that's barely in the code is snags. Snags are where you take a tree that's older or dying, and you cut it down a little bit in height so that the danger or the hazard part of it is gone. There's actually a couple of really beautiful examples of snags as you drive around that maybe people could have photos of, or those could go on the website. But what those need for is like the woodpeckers and other things, they need to live in those. Eagles and osprey will build on the top of those, particularly if they're eagles like lower ones, but osprey like the very, very tall ones. So I think snags need to be emphasized more. People need to know what they are and that they're an option. We did talk, a couple of the commissioners did talk about thinning trees. I think we need to talk a lot about connected canopy, because when a tree does fall, you end up with a gap canopy and different things grow, but you don't necessarily want to be thinning. And there's a whole forest succession that I learned about when I became a native plant steward in 2018. So I think we need to be careful on doing that. I think the biggest thing, and I also know there are other cities that do tree inventories. Where I'm from in Bozeman, Montana, they have an urban forestry management plan since 1993, and they have a tree inventory. So I'll try to look at that and see if there's anything that they could use. I was really sorry that the arborist was not funded, but at least the sustainability quarter is. The thing that concerns me is Kelly's talking about we're not even going to do code changes until 2025 after the comp plan. So let me give you a couple ideas. One of the easiest ways to save trees and to treat them well is for city permitting to work correctly. If someone puts in a development permit and they've got steep slopes in landslide hazard areas are supposed to preserve 100% of the trees, not just 35 or 25. And if steep slopes and landslide hazards are not properly identified, those trees will go. And if people just start clearing before they're allowed to, the trees will go. And once you knock down the trees, it's really hard to build them back up. I've also seen houses that are an R1 house. So it's one house on an acre. It only has 1 or 2 trees they're supposed to save, and 3 or 5 years later, they're dying because people parked under them for shade, or they drove over the roots, or they dug around them. And because of that, we're not keeping the trees that we're supposed to be saving. So I think there's a lot, I think every time we do something, I've been doing this for 7 years, every time we're trying to make progress, there's another 3-4 years on things. I think we need to think about as many things as we can do that we can do now. And one of them is just to make sure that we really are preserving and protecting critical areas, identifying the wetlands, making sure where the trees are, that they're saved. And when anybody is going to get their permit approved, that they're only doing it in the dry season, not in the wet season if it's a critical area, and that they've tagged those trees and put up those fences before they come down. Otherwise, too many trees get taken, nothing is ever done, and it's just left over. I did notice that the City Commission, I believe, did an executive session. There's somebody that took down trees, and they are trying to make sure that people are paying fines for those, which is good. But I also think the proactive teaching, getting people involved in everything is really important. And then the last thing is there's something called the Native Growth Protection Easements. It comes from King County. I know it was in the Stormwater Code, and I think it was wider than that. There's a lot of HOAs in the city that when they were built, part of their development was like set aside, you can't do anything. Then sometimes the HOAs really want to do things with those areas, like remove blackberries and plant more trees, but because of the NGP, Native Growth Protection Easement, they can't. And one of the biggest things I remember from the Urban Forestry Management Program is 51% of your urban forest is on private land. And so like an HOA is a private parcel. And if we don't do something between now and 2025, we're missing the opportunity to work with a large percentage of our urban forests. So I hope those are some ideas. I remember I have been listening. They started talking about the Urban Forestry Management Plan in 2015, kept putting more stuff into it. And it was really important. Started it in 2017, adopted it in 2019. And here we are in 2023. And I'm glad for the work that we've done. But I think every time we do something, we need to think about what can we do today that makes a difference to keep those trees, keep them healthy, educate the people, plant the right things. So I'll give back the rest of my time. Thank you for listening to me tonight. And really great interactions, questions. And I hope that the director, Kelly Hillity, will follow up on a couple items that she did, because those are super important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wichter. And we have one more hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hello, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Good meeting tonight on the Urban Forestry Plan. For those of you who don't know, I have a Bachelor of Science in Resource Conservation from the School of Forestry at the University of Montana, Missoula. But so I like sticks and trees. It has to do with my last name, I guess. But anyway, what I wanted to say tonight is the good comments I felt across the board on several topics about drought, species, wildfire, the number of goals, implementations with the projects. So kudos to a good discussion. And the inventory is impressive that the city has done. It was nice to hear from staff about jobs coming up and what's coming up in the next couple of years. So all real good information. A couple topics just for a little bit of historical context. Not everyone knows that Sammamish in 2005 passed its first tree retention ordinance, and subdivisions since 2005 had a 25% tree retention in the city. Then Mary Wichter was correct about the comp plan, the urban forestry plan, and tree retention. The 2005 ordinance was beefed up in 2014 and put into play before the 2015 comp plan was done. Then I believe, and I may not have this quite right, I believe in later 2015 there was an emergency ordinance that had interim tree retention standards that beefed the percentage of retention from 25 to 35%, and that was finished in 2017. The reason I mention that is the tree retention is sort of part A and parcel with the urban forestry plan. They sort of go hand in a glove. And the urban forestry plan was called for in the comp plan, and it's correct that I think it started in 2017 and was adopted in 2019. I'd like to comment on a couple things about the topic of fire, which I agree with, really does need to be addressed. And in my opinion, I think that, I know it's coming up this next cycle, but I think with it being a little more dry, especially the last few years, definite changes in Southern Oregon and Northern California, startling. And don't know for sure that's going to move our direction, but it's been warmer. I think having a plan, and I did quite a bit of research on this the last year off and on, and I'll summarize it into this. Most of the time, if there's a fire west of the Cascades, it stays reasonably localized and can be managed. But this is one of my key words, and I've known this word since taking fire classes back at the University of Montana long time ago. If you get a east wind issue in later September, October, that is the event that can cause a conflagration, a massive fire event, which has happened west of the Cascades every 100 years or so. And with things drying out, I'm not saying we should plan for a worst case like a 100-year storm and stormwater, but there might be some thought given to fire breaks and amount of spacing for a east wind fire event, which we have been getting some of those easterly winds, some of the heat domes and things that we've had. So I just tossed that out there. And during the urban forestry plan, I'm not making this about me, but I haven't heard anything about this. And I still think this is a major thing to consider. Trees get big. And I don't want people to cast rocks at me for this, but when should a tree be taken out because it's too big? If it's near houses, etc. You know, I've seen the Ashel Curtis trees. I've hiked on the Washington coast and seen a Quinault forest. I've seen the state park on the San Juans. Some of those trees are huge. So we're not quite there, and I'm not saying it's urgent, but is there some discussion and thought for, like if a tree gets to be 6 feet around in 100 years, should that be worked into the plan or just let that slide? I think it should be in there. But then the last thing is, I took a class last week from Western Washington University online, a Zoom class that said that, and the title is How to Take Part in Improving Community Climate Resilience via Trees. They had a couple great slides on a 50-minute presentation, and I'll email the Planning Commission those slides about how trees benefit people and benefit the environment. These are things we know, but they're in a really nice graphic format, really well laid out. And I just got the link yesterday to rewatch the video. It's not quite an hour, and it's okay to send, so I'll send that along. And if you have any interest in that, and the last thing I'll mention is kudos to Sammamish. Bellingham is way behind where we are as a city. You'll hear that loud and clear when you watch this video. They're trying to catch up, and we're already quite a ways ahead. So anyway, appreciate the and on 20,000 trees, I'm curious, do we have any anecdotal guess of how many trees are in Sammamish as a whole? So of the 20,000 that we've inventoried, this goes to Mary's comment, how many trees are there in the city? Is there 100,000? 200? 50? It would just be interesting to know. All right, appreciate the chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney, and we have no more hands raised.
All right, thanks. My rough math would say if 51% is on private land, then we probably have about 45,000 trees in the city. Okay, anything else from staff this evening?
Nothing major. I would just like to issue a friendly reminder to the Planning Commission that in advance of the March 2nd meeting, I believe it is, the March 2nd meeting, we're trying to set up 2s and 3s with each of you to go through the meeting materials about the Housing Action Plan beforehand, help answer any questions you might have, and just get you prepped for what I think will be a pretty dense meeting. So you should have received an email about scheduling that time, and just go ahead and give us a reply and we'll get you scheduled.
So does dense meeting mean that we should eat dinner beforehand?
Or bring snacks.
All right. I would second that. If you take a look at the calendar, and for those of you who are new, welcome to getting thrown in the deep end. We do have some pretty deep stuff that we're going to be getting into the next couple months, so buckle up. Okay, I think we're done for this evening. Would someone move to adjourn?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.